Lost Media Chronicles, a show which goes over various lost movies, music, art, and in this month's case, video games. Yeah, we've kind of hit the end of the road, and after a couple of episodes with very lame skits, I'm finally gonna go over something I promised to go over 4 months ago. You see, back in January, I was supposed to do an episode on today's topic. I had every intention of creating my own gameplay footage, including a guest spot of a 2Beats Plus co-star, and I was gonna have in-depth analytical game theory. However, relations with the person who was supposed to help me out with this have since slipped, and a lot of the gear that I was supposed to be using to make this episode got stolen. So finally I get the chance to tackle this, but unfortunately it's not going to be this big grand video I was originally planning, because I'm only doing this on my own. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Kirby Air Ride. Kirby is one of the many popular characters created by Nintendo. Notable for his circular design, he is a pink puffball that inhales enemies and swallows them to gain abilities. Created by Masahiro Sakurai, the games in the series are known for their easy controls, so that way children can pick up the game, yet adults will be able to pick it up as well because it does provide a little bit more of a challenge as you go along. Kirby's first game premiered in April 1992 for the Game Boy, and his popularity has only increased ever since. Now, Kirby is a series that has so much lost media that it could put Pokemon to shame. So we'll only be talking about this one game and its many different iterations in this episode. I'll cover the other stuff in future topics. Kirby's games have been released on a multitude of different systems from the NES all the way to the Wii U. Most of the games are platformers, but due to his circular design, developers have always liked to experiment with the character. He's been thrown into many different genres of games, from golfing to pinball and beyond. So when the Nintendo 64 went into development, Sakurai was called upon to create a game to show off the physics of the system using Kirby's circular design. This game, then titled Kirby Bowl 64, was one of the first announced games for the N64. The game was intended to be a sequel to Kirby's Dream Course. The object of the game was to putt Kirby around on the stage in order to avoid obstacles and enemies. There's a 9-second clip available on YouTube, as well as some snippets provided in a featurette discussing the N64's development a few months before its release. In this featurette, we see this woman playing a multiplayer mode in the game that involves a bunch of Kirbys rolling around trying to knock each other off the course. Beyond that, very little has ever been seen of it. After a few months in production, the game was retooled and retitled. Changed to Kirby's Air Ride, a new trailer for the game was made and shown at Space World 1996. This trailer, though short, featured Kirby wearing a backwards baseball cap and traversing a field on a warp star. This would have been unique in that it was an on-the-rails type of design. It also looks like Kirby had a health bar of some sort, which indicates the possibility of it being an adventure game. This is a big deal because the first racing adventure game wouldn't come out until Diddy Kong Racing a couple of years later. The game was also supposed to be the very first 4-player game for the N64. This early build was scrapped, likely due to its negative reception for its gameplay mechanics and oddball graphics. No ROM has ever surfaced of it or Kirby Bowl 64. Aside from the trailer and a few videos shown at Space World 1996, only a few screenshots have ever surfaced of the early build of the game. Allegedly, there were more videos and footage that were shown publicly, but those have yet to see the light of day. Fans have speculated that the game eventually became 1080-degree snowboarding, but this remains unconfirmed. Not much was shown or said about Kirby Air Ride after its faulty 1996 reception. Sakurai kept busy developing other projects such as the original Super Smash Bros., and Nintendo left the title surprisingly unsung for many years. The game became so notable that it got its own little section on the famous Kirby fan site Kirby's Rainbow Resorts. The game became one of the most famous unreleased games of all time, leading to fans of both Kirby and video games in general speculating towards what exactly happened to it. In 2003 though, everyone was surprised by a new announcement. Kirby's Air Ride, now just titled Kirby Air Ride, was finally slated for an official release for the Nintendo GameCube. In its release of October 2003, Kirby Air Ride was met with middling to positive reviews. Critics found its control scheme to be a bit awkward, though praised it for its graphics and ingenuity. It had 3 different main modes: a straightforward racing mode called Air Ride, a top-down racing mode called Top Ride, and, most famous of all, City Trial. City Trial was seen in some circles as something revolutionary for the video game industry, or at least the racing genre as a whole. It was a fully rendered city with regions each fitting a different theme. Better still were the multitudes of vehicles with their own perks. In the game, players were set with a time limit to traverse the city, in which they were to gather items and power-ups to make their vehicles more powerful. Chaotic events took place that would give you a slew of fantastic power-ups. At the end of the time limit, a random competition would take place. Some of these would include combat-based contests, jumping and flight competitions, and speed tournaments. Another unique aspect of the game were the controls. Most racing games have you hold down a button in order to make a vehicle run. Think of Mario Kart, for instance. In that game, you have to use the A button to keep the engine running, much like putting your foot down on a gas pedal. In Air Ride, however, you have to use the A button in order to stop the vehicle, which meant that as soon as you got on it, the vehicle took off at high speed. Well, except for a couple of them where you actually had to sit there and charge them. Yeah, I'm talking about the Bolt Star and Hydra, and granted, Hydra was awesome and it could massacre anything it crashed into, but did anybody ever actually enjoy playing on the Bolt Star? Anyways, I'm getting off topic. It really is a unique racing game, and if you can get around a lot of the odd features, it is very rewarding. I actually think it's one of the best and most overlooked racing games ever made. And now we get into the lost media connected to the GameCube release of Kirby Air Ride. First off, we have the unreleased material involving the debug menu, which is so massive it requires its own save file on memory cards. The debug menu uncovered 3 different vehicles that were never used in the official game of Kirby Air Ride. First off, you have the Top Ride vehicles, which appear to have been intended to be featured in City Trial, but were removed for unknown reasons. Next, we get this weird thing. I think it was meant to be the wheelie ability turned into a vehicle, and what we see happening to Kirby's body is just a glitch. It could also be just another vehicle in the wheelie family that was left unfinished. This particular vehicle remains rather mysterious. Also in the debug menu are a couple of unused racing tracks. It should be kept in mind though that because this content is accessible through the debug menu, it doesn't really count as lost media. However, it does clue us into how much material was planned for this game. And now we get to the subject of which a lot of videos haven't really brought up: the speculated lost media connected to City Trial. Part of what people really like to do with lost media is fantasize or just speculate about what might have been lost or missing about a piece of art. I personally usually don't like to touch up on this without really decisive evidence, but in this case there seems to be a lot of clues pointing in the general direction that there's a lot more that we haven't seen of City Trial than meets the eye. City Trial is a big, immersive, wide-open sandbox experience. The other 2 modes are fine, sure, but it was really City Trial that revolutionized things in its own way. It's easy to see that the game developers really put their heart and soul into it. I remember spending hours playing this game with an old childhood friend of mine. We'd play the free run of City Trial and we'd explore it. We'd split the vehicles, which were located underground, in half and formed our own bases that we'd call parking garages. We'd race to see who could get the most vehicles and then declare war on each other. We'd attack each other's vehicles and bases, and the first one to run out of vehicles would lose. And what's really strange is that when I hear other people talk about this game, there's a lot of players that like to experiment around with City Trial like that. The mode is a giant virtual playground that's easy to get lost in. I find it hard to believe that this is literally all they had in mind with it. Projects like this are rarely thought up without huge, sometimes overly ambitious effort put into them. Think about its developer, Masahiro Sakurai. He's known for overworking himself and leaving games filled to the brim with content. His Super Smash Bros. Games only get bigger with each iteration. I don't see this man as someone who just lets big, bold statements die just like that. I think City Trial was meant to be bigger, possibly with even more cities and regions to explore. One of the big clues is that in the game, the player has the ability to fly outside of the border of the city. If a player flies high enough, eventually their vehicle starts getting dragged down to the bottom. Sometimes this is outside of the game's rendered border, and you find yourself kind of driving off into infinity. Off in the distance though, you can see drawings of faraway lands. This had to be some sort of clue, right? Maybe, just maybe, there was more to the city than ever thought possible. Now, like I said, a lot of this is just pure speculation, but you also have to keep in mind what happened to its developer after its release. Kirby Air Ride took the better part of a decade to develop and had many different shapes and forms. I think that Masahiro Sakurai wanted to make this a huge, bold statement, but kept getting pressure from Nintendo and HAL Laboratories to release a straightforward racing game in order to match the sales of well-established formulas such as Mario Karts. This, coupled with the poor reception of the 1996 trailers and gameplay footage, is what kept delaying the game. I think eventually a compromise had to be made. Sakurai could make his immersive city as long as he also developed straightforward racing modes, hence the 3 different gameplay modes. It definitely does feel like Air Ride and Top Ride are less immersive than City Trial, although don't get me wrong, those are both still fun, but they definitely get boring a lot faster than City Trial does. Sakurai retired from HAL Laboratories in 2003 after the game was released. This shows clues that the game's development may have been more frustrating than he was originally letting on. Kirby Air Ride remains one of the most popular GameCube titles to this day, with many people calling it one of the most unique games for the console. The development of the game has led to a fascinating barrage of lost media which may never see the light of day, but it's really interesting to see how many different iterations went behind it. Which leads us to our final question. Is it really significant when parts of a game get pulled that were never intended for the final product? Well, really it depends. Video games, like all forms of media, have different parts of development and get various parts of them removed. I think it really comes down to how drastic of a change a game goes through from its conception to its release. Kirby Air Ride has gone through so many different transformations, which makes it more interesting than the average video game development. Is it as interesting as, say, Duke Nukem Forever's development? Well, no, but it's still got a lot of depth to it nonetheless. That about does it for this episode. Join us next time when we talk about even more internet-related media. With a special guest. See you later. Thank you guys so much for watching. Now, we're not going to have another one of these out for a few more weeks, as we're going to be focusing on the music review show 2 Beats Plus. Be sure to brush up on your Season 1 episodes, because our next video is going to be an episode of that show. Be sure to like, subscribe, and comment on this video if you want to see more similar to it. And check out some of our other episodes of the Lost Media Chronicles. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.